Have you ever felt a shiver of dread for something that never came to pass? Have you spent sleepless nights caught in a whirlwind of worry, only to find that the storm was entirely in your own mind? The great philosopher Michel de Montaigne once whispered a profound truth across the centuries, a truth that holds a sacred key to your own liberation. He said, "My life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." This isn't just a clever quote. It is a divine message, a recognition of the mental prison we so often build for ourselves, brick by painful brick of anxious thought. It speaks to the very frequency of overthinking, a vibration that can keep your soul trapped in a cycle of fear and what-ifs. If this message finds you at a pivotal moment in your journey, acknowledge it. Press the like button as a sign of recognition. Subscribe to receive more divine guidance that speaks to your higher self. And in the comments, I want you to affirm your awakening. Simply type, "I am not my thoughts," 111 or 777 to anchor this new frequency. You will find that you are not alone in this feeling, and you will see how many other souls are walking this same path toward freedom. What if the very foundation of what you've been taught about conquering overthinking is a grand illusion? What if the endless advice to meditate more, to chant mantras, to force positivity into your mind is actually a spiritual bypass, a way of avoiding the true source of your turmoil? Imagine a world with no more forcing, no more fighting, no more exhausting battles against your own thoughts. Forget the struggle. Forget the resistance. The path to inner peace is not a war to be won, but a simple, elegant trick to be learned. A spiritual secret was uncovered over 400 years ago, not in a monastery or a sacred text, but in the quiet solitude of a French nobleman's tower. Michel de Montaigne, a man who chose to live his philosophy rather than just preach it, discovered something shocking, something that turns modern self-help on its head. He found that the true cure for the torment of the mind is not to control it, not to wrestle it into submission, but to outwit it with a divine cleverness. This is the secret that allowed him to face the greatest trials of life, and even his own death, not with a stoic silence, but with a deep, liberating laughter. Stick with me on this journey, because by the end, you will hold the key to unlocking this same profound peace. You will understand how to disarm the stress that clings to the small things, freeing your energy for your true destiny. And the proof of this power? It's etched in history, in the story of a man who used these very methods to laugh on his deathbed. Michel de Montaigne was not a philosopher who lived in the clouds of abstract ideas. He was an alchemist of the human experience, turning the lead of everyday life into the gold of wisdom. At the young age of 38, he made a radical choice. He turned his back on the chaotic stage of public life and retreated into the sanctuary of his library, a tower that became a laboratory for the soul. He wasn't escaping the world. He was embarking on the ultimate inner pilgrimage. It was there, surrounded by the wisdom of the ages, that he hung a plaque, a declaration of his new divine mission. I do not understand. I pause. I examine. This was not an admission of defeat. It was the birth of his power. With this mantra of sacred humility, he began to dissect the very nature of human existence with a brutal, unwavering honesty. He looked into the mirror of his own mind and refused to flinch. And what did he discover in that unflinching gaze? He found a shocking truth that science is only now beginning to confirm. Overthinking isn't just a bad habit, a simple quirk of a busy mind. No, he saw it for what it truly is, a deep sickness of the soul. It is the futile, desperate attempt of our finite ego to control an infinite and uncontrollable universe. It is a soul crying out for certainty, in a world where the only certainty is change. Here is the uncomfortable truth your mind doesn't want you to hear, the core of Montaigne's revelation. Your brain was never designed for your happiness. It's a shocking thought, isn't it? But you must understand this. Your brain is an ancient survival machine. Its prime directive, hardwired over millennia of evolution, is not joy, not peace, not fulfillment, but one thing and one thing only: survival. It is a relic from a time when threats lurked behind every bush, when a rustle in the grass could mean the difference between life and death. Every single time you find yourself obsessing over a mistake from your past, reliving the shame, the regret, the sting of what you should have done differently, you are not being deep or insightful. You are not learning a valuable lesson. You are simply obeying that ancient, primitive wiring. Your survival brain is mistaking a memory for a present danger. It is screaming, "Never let this happen again." And every time you spiral into anxiety about a future disaster, a disaster that exists only in the phantom realms of your imagination, you are not being prepared. You are not being responsible. You are obeying that same primal code. Your brain is trying to protect you from a threat that isn't real, flooding your system with the hormones of fear and stress, all for a battle that will never be fought. It tragically mistakes the feeling of anxiety for the act of preparedness. Montaigne saw this mechanism with crystal clarity. He recognized that we torture ourselves. We chain our own souls with two fundamental lies, two twin tyrants that rule the kingdom of the anxious mind. The first tyrant whispers, "If I worry enough, if I rehearse every possible negative outcome, I can prevent the pain." This is the illusion of control through anxiety. We believe that by marinating in fear, we are somehow building a spiritual armor against future suffering. The second tyrant insists, "If I analyze enough, if I dissect every angle, every detail, every possibility, I will find the certainty I crave." This is the illusion of safety through intellect. We believe that if we can just think our way through the chaos, we can build a fortress of logic that will protect us from the unknown. But Montaigne knew these were phantoms. He saw the scholars of his day endlessly debating without resolution, the politicians scheming for a future they could never secure, and ordinary people everywhere sacrificing the sacred peace of the present moment for the ghost of an imaginary future. He saw this soul sickness everywhere. His entire philosophy, his life's work, became the search for the antidote, and he found it, not in some complex formula, but in a single, devastatingly simple question. What do I know? This was not a rhetorical question for idle contemplation. For Montaigne, this became a weapon, a razor-sharp sword of divine truth designed to sever the chains of overanalysis. By courageously, humbly admitting his own ignorance, he shattered the vicious cycle at its source. Think about it. How many precious hours of your one sacred life have you wasted rehearsing conversations that never took place? How much energy have you poured into regretting decisions that ultimately changed nothing? How many nights have you lost, wrestling with demons that were never real? Stop pretending your thoughts are prophecies. They are not divine messages from the future. They are clouds passing in the sky of your awareness, nothing more. Montaigne's cure begins right here, in this moment. It starts with a radical practice he began on his 39th birthday, a practice that can change your life tonight. Every time his mind began to race with the familiar, anxious chatter, "What will they think of me? What if I fail? What if I lose everything?" He would not fight the thought. He would not suppress it. Instead, he would perform a kind of spiritual triage. He would hold the thought up to the light and ask a different set of questions. He wouldn't ask, "Is this thought true?" because that question feeds the tyrant of analysis. Instead, he would ask, "Is this thought useful? Is it useful for me to spin in this loop of fear right now? Can I take a direct, immediate action on this worry?" And then the most powerful question of all, in 5 years, will I even remember this? If the answer to these questions was no, which it almost always was, he would literally physically shrug his shoulders and say his famous motto, "Que sais, que? What do I know?" He would release the thought, not with force, but with the gentle indifference of a hand opening to let a feather float away on the wind. This was not avoidance, it was the highest form of mental clarity. It was triage for the soul, a way of discerning which thoughts deserved his sacred energy and which were merely phantoms, noise to be dismissed. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Within months of this practice, Montaigne reported feeling lighter than air. He slept better. He wrote with more freedom and insight. He faced real betrayal, real illness, and the tragic death of his best friend not with a heart of stone, but with an eerie, unshakable calm. His secret was simple. He stopped mistaking his thoughts for reality. And here is where ancient wisdom and modern science converge in a beautiful, divine dance. Modern neuroscience confirms precisely what Montaigne discovered through his own inner exploration. Studies have shown that the simple act of labeling your emotions, as Montaigne did, of saying, "This is anxiety," or "This is fear," can reduce their emotional intensity by up to 50%. Functional MRI scans prove that when you say to yourself, "This is just a thought," you are literally quieting the amygdala, the brain's primal fear center. You are shifting power from the reactive, ancient brain to the conscious, observant mind. But here is where the path becomes dangerous, and where so many modern solutions fall short. Today's popular answers, journaling, breathwork, cognitive behavioral therapy can, if we are not careful, feed the very monster we are trying to starve. They often encourage us to engage with our thoughts, to analyze them, to track them, to make our own inner peace another project, another task on our endless to-do list. Montaigne's method is radically different, profoundly more liberating. It doesn't say, "Manage your thoughts." It says, "Your thoughts are mostly garbage." It doesn't ask you to organize them, sort them, or file them away neatly. It simply invites you to stop collecting them. This isn't about the naive power of positive thinking. It is about the sovereign power of indifference. It is about understanding that most of what flickers through your mind is not worthy of your attention, let alone your belief. Montaigne's journals reveal a man who learned to laugh at his own fears, to mock his own vanity. He wrote entire chapters, not on lofty spiritual matters, but on his own bowel movements, on his moments of cowardice, on his petty insecurities. Why? To expose the profound absurdity of taking ourselves so seriously, to show that beneath the grand personas we project, we are all just fragile, beautiful, and slightly ridiculous human beings. This is where we find the deepest truth, the great paradox of existence. The happiest people, the most resilient souls, are often the ones who have suffered the most. And now, we must go deeper, to the next layer of this teaching, because it is darker, but infinitely more liberating. It explains how Montaigne turned pain into power, and why your very worst thoughts might be your greatest spiritual teachers. Most people spend their entire lives running from pain. We mask it with productivity, we numb it with distraction, we drown it in self-pity. But Montaigne did the unthinkable. He didn't just accept suffering, he invited it in for dinner. He treated it not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a teacher to be studied. When the plague ravaged his village, he did not flee. He stayed to witness the carnage, to look death and grief squarely in the face. When excruciating kidney stones left him screaming in agony, he did not just endure it. He took out his journal and documented every sensation, every spasm, every wave of pain in vivid, meticulous detail. And in doing so, he stumbled upon a truth so profound it has the power to flip modern psychology on its head. Your darkest thoughts are not the enemy. They are the blueprint for your liberation. Montaigne's journals reveal a man who was haunted by a deep existential dread. At night, he would lie awake, paralyzed by terrifying visions of his own death. During the day, he would obsess over petty insults with the intensity of a schoolgirl wounded by a casual glance. But here is where he diverged from all modern coping mechanisms. He did not try to fix these thoughts. He did not try to reason them away or replace them with affirmations. Instead, he did something utterly radical. He amplified them. When fear whispered, "You will die forgotten," he wouldn't push the thought away. He would sit down and write entire essays, imagining his own corpse rotting in the ground, exploring the sensation of non-existence. When shame hissed, "They're laughing at you," he would write in grotesque detail about his most humiliating and embarrassing moments, exposing them to the light. This was not masochism. This was a form of exposure therapy, centuries before Freud ever conceived of it. By dragging his worst fears into the bright daylight of his consciousness, he discovered their secret. He learned that thoughts, especially the terrifying ones, shrink when stared at. They derive their power from the shadows, from our resistance, from our desperate attempts to run away. Modern therapy teaches us to reframe suffering. Montaigne went further. He befriended it. His famous motto, "To philosophize is to learn how to die," wasn't morbid. It was intensely practical. By rehearsing tragedy daily, by familiarizing his soul with the worst possible outcomes, He achieved what psychologists now call stress inoculation. He was immunizing himself against the shocks and sorrows of life. Consider his world. A world of plague, constant war, and no anesthesia. And compare it to ours. We have safety, comfort, and SSRIs. Yet we suffer from record levels of mental illness. What is the difference? We have sterilized our existence. We have become allergic to the very discomfort that is essential for building a resilient soul. Montaigne's constant, conscious confrontation with his own mortality created a space within him, a kind of existential sovereignty that allowed him to see life with a breathtaking clarity. And this sets the stage for the most disturbing and ultimately most freeing revelation of all. How Montaigne used these very techniques to cheat death itself on his final sickbed. On September 13th, 1592, Michel de Montaigne lay dying in his chateau. His body was ravaged by kidney stones and a severe infection. As his family wept around him, and a priest leaned in to hear his final confession, something inexplicable happened. The great philosopher began to laugh, a deep, rumbling, uncontrollable laughter. When his loved ones, bewildered and concerned, asked what could possibly be so funny at such a moment, Montaigne whispered, "I just realized I have been rehearsing this moment for 30 years. And then he did something even more astonishing. Propping himself up on his bloodless elbows, he began correcting edits in his personal essays, literally scribbling notes in the margins of his own life as it slipped away. This was not an act of bravery. This was not denial. It was the absolute culmination of his life's work, the ultimate hack for transcending human fear. Years earlier, Montaigne had developed a gruesome daily ritual. Each morning, he would spend 10 minutes visualizing his own death in visceral sensory detail. The rasping breaths, the sour smell of sweat on linen, the way the light would fade from his study windows. He would then write his own imaginary eulogy, not some flattering, self-serving tribute, but a brutally honest one. Here lies Michel. One draft reads, "Who cared too much about Roman history and too little about his wife's headaches?" Finally, he'd engage in small, deliberate acts of discomfort, eating breakfast with his left hand despite being right-handed, forcing himself to experience clumsiness, spilled wine, and the mockery of his servants. This served one purpose: to make the unfamiliar familiar, to make the feared mundane. Modern neuroscience confirms what Montaigne intuited. The brain simply cannot maintain a state of terror towards scenarios it has repeatedly and safely simulated. MRI scans show that soldiers who mentally rehearse combat exhibit 40% less amygdala activation during actual warfare. Montaigne weaponized this. By dying daily, he was immunizing his soul against the fear of death. So, on his actual deathbed, Montaigne performed his final grand experiment. He demanded a bowl of rotten plums to smell decay, his least favorite lute song played off-key, a mirror to watch his own face turn gray. He was approaching his own demise not as a victim, but with the detached, clinical curiosity of a scientist. He was rating the experience, noting its textures and flavors. "The pain is sharp, but not without elegance," his doctor's notes record him saying. "The fear tastes of iron and burnt time. On balance, I'd rate dying a 6 out of 10. Overrated, but with moments of interest." This was no act. Montaigne's journals had already revealed his ultimate discovery. Suffering becomes optional the moment you treat it as fieldwork. By approaching his own end with this radical curiosity, he achieved what Buddhist monks spend decades pursuing: the observer's state, a place of pure awareness beyond fear and suffering. So, when panic strikes you tonight, try this forgotten Renaissance protocol. First, locate the fear in your body. Don't name it with words, just feel its physical location. Is it a tightness in your chest? A knot in your stomach? Second, begin to describe its raw physical properties aloud. It is cold. It is vibrating. It is heavy. Third, interview it like an anthropologist discovering a new tribe. What brought you here tonight? What do you need me to understand? This simple process achieves what deep breathing and positive thinking cannot. It objectifies the emotion. It bypasses the language centers of the brain that amplify suffering and engages the sensory parts that simply experience. It dissolves the story, leaving only the sensation, and a sensation, no matter how intense, is always temporary. Studies on Holocaust survivors found that those who could articulate their trauma in the third person, "the boy was afraid," rather than "I was afraid," showed 70% less PTSD symptomatology. Montaigne's genius was applying this principle not just to past trauma, but to the everyday anxieties of life. The invitation, then, isn't to stare into the abyss, but to laugh with it, as Montaigne did. Tonight, when some petty worry hijacks your sacred mind, ask yourself that one liberating question: will this matter on my deathbed? And if the answer is no, then smile, shrug, and go fix your stable door.